Maria Santos had been invisible for most of her adult life, and she preferred it that way. At 52 years old, she moved through the corridors of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center like a ghost in Scrubs, her small frame barely registering in the peripheral vision of doctors, nurses, and visiting officials who bustled past her with urgent purpose. She was just another member of the cleaning staff, another woman in faded blue uniforms who emptied trash cans, mopped floors, and sanitized surfaces while the important people did their important work. The early morning shift suited Maria perfectly. She arrived at 4:30 each day, when the hospital was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the occasional murmur of night staff. She preferred these peaceful hours before the chaos began, when she could work methodically through her assigned floors without interruption. Her supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, had long ago stopped checking on Maria's work. 23 years of spotless performance had earned her that trust, even if it hadn't earned her much else. Maria's cart squeaked slightly as she pushed it down the long hallway of the intensive care unit. She had requested maintenance to fix that squeak dozens of times over the past year, but maintenance always had more pressing concerns than the cart of a cleaning woman. So she learned to live with it, just as she had learned to live with many small indignities that came with being overlooked. The ICU was Maria's most challenging assignment, but also her most meaningful. This was where the most critically injured service members fought for their lives, where families kept vigil beside hospital beds, where hope and despair wrestled in sterile rooms filled with life support equipment. Maria had seen young soldiers arrive broken and unconscious, had watched some of them slowly heal while others never woke up. She had witnessed the raw grief of mothers who would never again hear their children's voices, and the quiet joy of wives welcoming husbands back from the edge of death. Though she rarely spoke to the patients directly, Maria felt a deep connection to each person in her care. She knew that Master Sergeant Rodriguez in room 304 always tried to smile when she entered, despite the breathing tube that prevented him from speaking. She knew that the young Marine in 307 had nightmares that left him sweating and calling out for his squad members who hadn't made it home. She knew that the Navy pilot in 312 stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to remember the crash that had shattered 3 vertebrae and ended his flying career. Maria understood pain in a way that transcended language barriers and military ranks. She had lost her own son, Miguel, in Afghanistan 8 years earlier. He had been just 22, a bright-eyed Army medic who wrote letters home about helping his fellow soldiers and making their parents proud. The letter from his commanding officer had praised Miguel's courage under fire, describing how he had died while dragging wounded comrades to safety during a Taliban ambush. But all the official praise in the world couldn't fill the empty space at Maria's dinner table, or ease the ache in her chest that never quite went away. After Miguel's death, Maria had requested a transfer to Walter Reed. Her previous job at a civilian hospital had paid better, but she needed to be somewhere that honored military service, somewhere that her daily work could feel like a continuation of her son's mission to help soldiers. Mrs. Henderson had been skeptical about hearing someone with such personal stakes in the work, worried that the emotional weight might prove too much. But Maria had demonstrated a steady professionalism that impressed even the most demanding doctors. What Mrs. Henderson and the medical staff didn't know was that Maria talked to the patients every day, not in English, which had never come easily to her despite decades in America, but in soft Spanish whispers that she hoped might somehow penetrate their medicated sleep. She told unconscious soldiers about her Miguel, about how proud he had been to serve alongside them. She promised comatose Marines that someone would always remember their sacrifice. She assured paralyzed airmen that their worth wasn't measured by what their bodies could or couldn't do. When families visited, Maria made herself even more invisible than usual. She understood that these were sacred moments, times when parents and spouses needed privacy to process their grief and fear. But she also paid attention to the small details that might make their vigil more bearable. She noticed when flowers began to wilt and quietly replaced them with fresh arrangements from the hospital gift shop, paying out of her own modest salary. She observed when family members looked hungry but were reluctant to leave their loved one's bedside, and she made sure that vending machines on the floor were always fully stocked. The nursing staff had begun to depend on Maria's observations, though they rarely acknowledged her contributions directly. When she quietly mentioned to Nurse Patricia that the patient in 309 seemed more agitated than usual, Patricia would check his medications, and often discover that pain management needed adjustment. When Maria noted that a family seemed overwhelmed by the complexity of insurance paperwork, social workers would mysteriously appear with offers to help navigate the bureaucracy. Dr. Williams, the chief of the ICU, had worked alongside Maria for nearly a decade without ever learning her last name. To him, she was simply the cleaning lady who speaks Spanish, useful when they needed someone to communicate with family members who hadn't mastered English. He didn't know that Maria had earned a teaching degree in El Salvador before immigrating to America, or that she had worked as a translator for immigration services before taking the hospital job to be closer to Miguel when he was stationed at nearby Fort Belvoir. The military families trusted Maria in ways that surprised her. Perhaps it was her quiet dignity, or the careful respect she showed for their loved ones, or simply the fact that she was always there when they needed a familiar face in the sterile hospital environment. Mothers would confide their fears to her in broken Spanish, and she would respond with gentle reassurance that their sons and daughters were receiving excellent care. Wives would ask her opinion about difficult medical decisions, somehow sensing that this woman understood the weight of sacrifice in ways that doctors and social workers could not. One evening, Mrs. Catherine Murphy, whose son Patrick had been in a medically induced coma for 6 weeks after an IED explosion, approached Maria with tears streaming down her face. Patrick's condition had taken a turn for the worse, and doctors were suggesting that the family consider transitioning to comfort care. Mrs. Murphy spoke no Spanish, and Maria's English was limited, but they sat together in the family waiting area and communicated through shared tears and gentle hand-holding. "He's so young," Mrs. Murphy whispered, showing Maria a photo of Patrick in his dress uniform. 24 years old. He wanted to be a teacher when he got out of the army. Maria looked at the photograph and saw Miguel's face reflected in every young soldier's smile. She couldn't find the English words to express what she felt, so instead she pulled out her own wallet and showed Mrs. Murphy the picture she always carried Miguel in his medic uniform, grinning broadly on his graduation day from basic training. "Mi hijo," Maria said softly. "My son, Afghanistan." Mrs. Murphy understood immediately. They held each other and cried for their boys, for all the boys who had given everything in service to their country. From that moment, Mrs. Murphy made sure that Maria was included in family conversations about Patrick's care. When other military families saw this acceptance, they began to view Maria differently, not as invisible help, but as someone who truly understood their situation. Word spread quietly through the tight-knit community of military families who frequented Walter Reed. Maria became known as the woman who had lost her own son, but continued to care for others. Families began seeking her out for comfort and advice. They appreciated that she never offered empty platitudes or false optimism, but instead provided the steady presence of someone who had walked through the valley of military loss and emerged with her compassion intact. The hospital administration remained largely unaware of Maria's growing reputation among patients and families. Her supervisor evaluations were always satisfactory, but rarely exceptional. She completed her assigned tasks efficiently and caused no problems, which was sufficient for institutional purposes. The fact that she had become an unofficial counselor and advocate for military families wasn't captured in any formal assessment of her performance. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychiatrist who specialized in military trauma, was the first staff member to truly recognize Maria's unique role in the healing process. She had noticed that patients seemed calmer after Maria's visits, and families appeared more hopeful after speaking with her. When Dr. Chen discreetly inquired about this phenomenon, she discovered that Maria had been providing emotional support that complemented the medical treatment in profound ways. "She has a gift," Dr. Chen told her colleague, Dr. Williams. "The families trust her completely, and the patients respond to her presence even when they're unconscious. I think she's processing her own grief by helping others through theirs." Dr. Williams was skeptical. "She's a cleaning lady who barely speaks English. I'm sure she means well, but we can't have untrained staff providing psychological support to vulnerable families." But Dr. Chen persisted in her observations, and gradually she began to document the positive outcomes associated with Maria's informal counseling. Families who spent time talking with Maria showed lower levels of anxiety and depression. Patients in rooms that Maria visited frequently had fewer complications and shorter recovery times. The correlation was subtle but statistically significant. Meanwhile, Maria continued her quiet work, unaware that anyone was studying her impact. She focused on the daily tasks that brought her closer to the soldiers she served, ensuring their rooms were spotless, their families were comfortable, and their sacrifice was honored through her careful attention to detail. She had found her own way to continue Miguel's mission of helping soldiers, and that was enough. The morning routine never varied. Maria arrived before dawn, collected her supplies, and began the methodical process of caring for her assigned floors. She worked with the precision of someone who understood that small details mattered enormously to people facing life's biggest challenges. Every surface was cleaned thoroughly, every trash can emptied completely, every family waiting area stocked with tissues and water cups. But Maria's real work happened in the spaces between official duties, in the quiet moments when she offered silent prayers over unconscious patients, in the gentle conversations with worried family members, in the careful attention she paid to signs that someone needed help they were too proud to request. She had learned to read the language of military suffering, and she responded with the fluency of someone who had mastered grief through personal experience. As her reputation grew among military families, Maria began to receive small tokens of appreciation, thank you notes written in careful handwriting, flowers left at the nurse's station with her name attached, photographs of soldiers who had recovered enough to return home. She kept these mementos in a small box in her locker, treasures that reminded her why this work mattered. The night shift nurses had begun to rely on Maria's assessments of patient status and family dynamics. When she quietly mentioned that a particular family seemed to be struggling with acceptance of their loved one's prognosis, the chaplain would receive a request to visit that room. When she noted that a patient's breathing seemed more labored than usual, night staff would check ventilator settings and often discover needed adjustments. Maria's influence extended beyond the ICU to other areas of the hospital where military patients received care. Physical therapy staff learned to consult her about which patients might benefit from Spanish language encouragement. Social workers discovered that she could provide cultural context that improved their ability to support Latino military families. Even the hospital cafeteria staff began asking Maria for advice about foods that might comfort homesick soldiers. Yet despite her growing importance to the military community at Walter Reed, Maria remained officially invisible. Her name appeared on no organizational charts, her contributions were mentioned in no staff meetings, her insights were recorded in no patient files. She existed in the margins of the institution, powerful and overlooked simultaneously. This invisibility was about to change in ways that Maria could never have imagined. A series of events was already in motion that would bring her quiet heroism to the attention of people with the power to ensure that her service was finally recognized. But for now, she continued her rounds, caring for America's wounded warriors with the same dedication she brought to every task, unaware that someone very important had been watching her work. The change began with Staff Sergeant David Kim, though Maria had no way of knowing that this particular patient would alter the trajectory of her life. He arrived at Walter Reed on a Tuesday morning in March, unconscious and fighting for his life after an improvised explosive device had torn through his convoy in Syria. The blast had left him with severe traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures, and burns across 40% of his body. Doctors gave his family a guarded prognosis and prepared them for a long, uncertain recovery. Staff Sergeant Kim's mother, Grace, flew in from California within hours of receiving the notification. She was a small, determined woman who had immigrated from South Korea 30 years earlier and built a successful accounting practice through sheer force of will. She spoke perfect English and needed no translation services, but she possessed the immigrant's instinctive recognition of others who had traveled difficult paths to reach America. Grace Kim noticed Maria immediately, not because Maria drew attention to herself, but because Grace had spent decades observing the subtle dynamics of who held real power in institutional settings. She watched Maria work with methodical precision, saw how the nursing staff deferred to her observations, observed the careful attention she paid to family members who seemed overwhelmed by the hospital environment. When Maria entered Staff Sergeant Kim's room on her third day of rounds, she found Grace sitting beside the bed, holding her son's bandaged hand and speaking to him in rapid Korean. Maria understood the universal language of maternal worry, and she worked quietly around the room while Grace maintained her vigil. As Maria prepared to leave, Grace looked up with tears in her eyes. "Excuse me," Grace said softly. You've been taking care of this room. I wanted to thank you. Maria paused, surprised by the direct acknowledgement. Most family members barely noticed her presence, treating her as part of the hospital machinery rather than as a person. "Es mi trabajo," she replied, then caught herself and switched to English. "Is my job." "But you do it with such care," Grace continued. "I can see that you pay attention to David as a person, not just as another room to clean. That matters to me." Something in Grace's tone reminded Maria of conversations she had shared with other military mothers. "Your son," she said carefully, "he is soldier." "Army Staff Sergeant," Grace confirmed with evident pride. "Military intelligence. He was helping train Iraqi forces when this happened." Maria nodded with understanding. "My son, he was soldier too. Afghanistan, 8 years now." The simple statement contained volumes of shared experience, and Grace immediately grasped its significance. "I'm so sorry. What was his name?" "Miguel Santos. He was medic, like Angel for other soldiers." Maria's voice carried the weight of years spent balancing pride and grief. From that moment, Grace Kim began paying close attention to Maria's work throughout the ICU. She observed how Maria seemed to anticipate the needs of patients and families before they voiced them. She watched Maria quietly adjust window blinds to reduce glare for patients with head injuries, noticed how she always ensured that Spanish-speaking families had access to translation services, saw the gentle way she repositioned unconscious patients to prevent bed sores. Most importantly, Grace witnessed the transformation that occurred when Maria spoke to her comatose son. Each morning, after completing the standard cleaning routine, Maria would spend a few extra moments at David's bedside, speaking softly in Spanish while checking that his breathing seemed steady and his position looked comfortable. She couldn't know that David was actually beginning to emerge from the deepest stages of unconsciousness, that her voice was among the first human sounds to penetrate his medicated fog. Staff Sergeant Kim's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. After 2 weeks, he began showing signs of increased brain activity. After 3 weeks, he was breathing independently. By the end of the first month, he was following simple commands and recognizing his mother's voice. Throughout this period, Maria maintained her careful attention to his care, and Grace began to suspect that her son's improvement was connected to the extraordinary dedication of this overlooked woman. Grace Kim possessed something that most military families at Walter Reed lacked: professional connections to people with significant influence. Her accounting firm served several high-ranking retired military officers who had transitioned to civilian careers, and she maintained relationships with former clients who now held important positions in veteran advocacy organizations. She had never leveraged these connections for personal gain, but watching Maria's selfless service to military families inspired her to consider how she might help ensure that such dedication was properly recognized. The opportunity came when Colonel James Harrison, one of Grace's longtime clients, called to check on David's progress. Colonel Harrison had served as Staff Sergeant Kim's commanding officer during an earlier deployment and maintained a personal interest in his recovery. During their conversation, Grace found herself describing Maria's impact on the ICU environment and her unique relationship with military families. "There's this woman," Grace explained, "who works as a cleaning staff member but provides emotional support that goes far beyond her job description. She lost her own son in Afghanistan, and she's channeled that experience into helping other military families cope with trauma. I think she's making a real difference in patient outcomes." Colonel Harrison was intrigued. In his post-military career as a defense contractor, he had become involved with several veteran advocacy organizations and understood the importance of recognizing exceptional service by civilians who supported military personnel. "What's her name?" he asked. "Maria Santos," Grace replied. "She's been invisible to the hospital administration, but the families here know her value. I think someone should acknowledge what she's doing." Colonel Harrison made note of Maria's name and began making inquiries through his network of contacts. He discovered that Walter Reed had numerous civilian employees who went above and beyond their basic job requirements, but very few received formal recognition for their contributions. The military culture of honoring service seemed to stop at the boundary between uniformed personnel and civilian support staff. Meanwhile, Maria continued her rounds, unaware that her name was circulating through channels far above her pay grade. Staff Sergeant Kim's condition continued to improve, and he began to recognize Maria during her visits. Though his speech was still limited, he would nod when she entered his room and sometimes managed to whisper "gracias" when she adjusted his pillows or brought fresh water to his bedside table. Dr. Chen had been documenting Maria's impact on patient care for several months, compiling data that demonstrated statistically significant improvements in recovery times and family satisfaction scores for patients under Maria's informal care. She had been preparing a presentation for the hospital administration, hoping to secure some form of official recognition for Maria's contributions. When Colonel Harrison's inquiries began reaching Walter Reed through official channels, Dr. Chen's research suddenly became much more relevant to hospital leadership. The intersection of Grace Kim's advocacy, Colonel Harrison's military connections, and Dr. Chen's clinical research created a perfect storm of attention focused on Maria's work. Hospital administrators who had never heard her name began asking questions about this cleaning staff member who apparently had such a profound impact on military families. Nursing supervisors were asked to provide assessments of Maria's performance and interactions with patients. Mrs. Henderson, Maria's immediate supervisor, found herself in the unusual position of fielding inquiries from hospital executives about one of her cleaning staff members. She had always considered Maria a reliable but unremarkable employee, someone who completed assigned tasks without complaint and caused no problems. The suggestion that Maria was providing quasi-therapeutic services to patients and families initially made Mrs. Henderson defensive. "Maria Santos is a good worker," Mrs. Henderson told Dr. Williams during their hastily arranged meeting. "But she's not trained in patient care, and I'm not sure it's appropriate for cleaning staff to be developing personal relationships with families." Dr. Williams, who had recently been briefed on Colonel Harrison's inquiries and Dr. Chen's research, found himself in the awkward position of defending someone whose value he was only beginning to understand. "The feedback we're receiving suggests that Mrs. Santos has been providing support that's actually beneficial to patient outcomes. We need to understand what she's been doing and whether it should be formalized in some way." The conversation marked the beginning of a hospital-wide evaluation of Maria's role and impact. For the first time in her 23 years at Walter Reed, Maria Santos was being noticed by people with the power to change her circumstances. But she remained unaware of the attention her work was attracting, focused as always on the daily tasks that connected her to the soldiers she served. The evaluation process revealed the extent to which Maria had become integral to the ICU's informal support system. Nurses admitted that they routinely sought her input on patient comfort and family dynamics. Social workers acknowledged that her cultural insights had improved their ability to serve Latino military families. Even hospital chaplains reported that Maria often identified families who needed spiritual support, but were hesitant to request it directly. Dr. Chen's presentation to the hospital leadership team provided compelling evidence that Maria's contributions extended far beyond custodial services. Patient satisfaction scores in areas where Maria worked were consistently higher than in comparable units. Length of stay for patients in Maria's care was shorter than average. Family stress levels, as measured by social work assessments, were lower when Maria provided informal support. "We have an employee who has essentially created her own patient care role," Dr. Chen explained to the assembled administrators. "She's providing services that complement our medical treatment in ways that improve outcomes and reduce costs. The question is whether we formally recognize and support this work, or continue to pretend it's just exceptionally good housekeeping." Colonel Harrison's involvement had elevated the discussion beyond hospital politics to considerations of how civilian institutions could better support military families. His contacts in the Pentagon and veteran advocacy organizations were asking pointed questions about whether Walter Reed was adequately recognizing civilians who made extraordinary contributions to military patient care. The pressure for action increased when Grace Kim submitted a formal letter of commendation for Maria to the hospital administration. Her letter detailed specific examples of Maria's impact on her son's recovery and urged the hospital to acknowledge the vital role that Maria played in supporting military families. Grace copied the letter to Colonel Harrison and several other influential figures in the military community. "Mrs. Santos represents the best of civilian support for our military families," Grace wrote. "She has channeled her personal loss into service that honors her son's sacrifice while helping other families navigate their darkest hours. Her dedication deserves recognition commensurate with the value she provides to our wounded warriors and their loved ones. The letter triggered a series of meetings and discussions that gradually built momentum for some form of official recognition of Maria's contributions. Hospital administrators who had been skeptical about acknowledging non-medical staff found themselves under pressure from military liaisons and veteran advocacy groups to demonstrate that Walter Reed valued all forms of service to military personnel. Dr. Williams, who had initially dismissed Maria as the cleaning lady who speaks Spanish, found himself tasked with developing a proposal for how the hospital might formally recognize her contributions. He consulted with Dr. Chen, reviewed patient outcome data, and interviewed nursing staff about Maria's role in patient care. The picture that emerged was of someone who had created an entirely new category of hospital service through personal initiative and dedication. Meanwhile, Maria continued her daily routine, aware that there seemed to be more meetings and conversations happening around her work, but not understanding the significance of these developments. She focused on the tasks that brought her joy, ensuring that wounded soldiers received not just medical care, but also the emotional support that honored their sacrifice and reminded them that their service mattered. Staff Sergeant Kim's recovery accelerated as his brain healed and his other injuries stabilized. He was transferred from the ICU to a general medical ward, where Maria continued to visit him during her expanded rounds. His speech had improved enough for basic conversations, and he often asked about Maria's son Miguel, understanding instinctively that their shared military experience created a bond that transcended the usual patient-staff relationship. Miguel would be proud, he told Maria one afternoon as she arranged fresh flowers that Grace had brought for his room. He would see how you help soldiers and know that his sacrifice still matters. Maria smiled through tears she couldn't quite suppress. All soldiers matter, she replied. Miguel, you todos los soldados, you are not forgotten. The conversation was overheard by Dr. Chen, who was conducting one of her regular assessments of patient psychological status. She noted in Staff Sergeant Kim's file that his emotional recovery appeared to be progressing as well as his physical healing, and she attributed much of this progress to the ongoing support he received from Maria Santos. The documented evidence of Maria's positive impact continued to accumulate, building an irrefutable case that this overlooked cleaning staff member was providing services that enhanced patient care and improved outcomes. Hospital administrators found themselves facing a decision about how to respond to this unprecedented situation, how to honor someone whose contributions had flourished in the margins of official recognition. The answer would come from an unexpected source, through a chain of communications that would ultimately reach the highest levels of military leadership and result in recognition that would transform Maria's life in ways she could never have imagined. Colonel Harrison's inquiries had reached the desk of General Patricia Reeves, a four-star general who served as the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel. General Reeves had built her career on understanding the human dimension of military service, recognizing that soldier welfare extended far beyond basic medical care to encompass the entire support ecosystem that enabled recovery and resilience. When she received Colonel Harrison's report about Maria Santos, she saw an opportunity to highlight the critical role that civilians played in military readiness. General Reeves had risen through the ranks during an era when the Army was learning hard lessons about the importance of comprehensive support for wounded warriors. She had witnessed the transformation of military medicine from a focus on immediate battlefield treatment to recognition that long-term recovery required addressing psychological, social, and spiritual needs alongside physical healing. The idea that a civilian hospital employee was providing such holistic support to military families captured her attention immediately. "Get me a full briefing on this situation," General Reeves instructed her aide, Major Rebecca Foster. "I want to understand exactly what this woman is doing and why it's making such a difference in patient outcomes." Major Foster, a career personnel officer who specialized in military family support programs, was tasked with conducting a comprehensive review of Maria's impact at Walter Reed. She coordinated with hospital administrators, interviewed staff members, and spoke directly with military families who had benefited from Maria's care. The picture that emerged impressed even Major Foster, who had seen numerous examples of exceptional civilian support for military personnel. The investigation revealed that Maria had essentially created an unofficial family liaison program that filled gaps in formal hospital services. She provided cultural translation that went beyond language to help families understand complex medical procedures and institutional expectations. She offered emotional support based on her personal experience with military loss, giving her credibility that professional counselors sometimes lacked. Most importantly, she had developed an intuitive ability to identify when families needed help, but were too proud or overwhelmed to ask for it directly. Major Foster's report documented specific cases where Maria's intervention had prevented family crises and improved patient outcomes. She had helped a Spanish-speaking father understand his son's prognosis when official interpreters were unavailable, preventing a potential conflict with medical staff. She had identified signs of depression in a military wife and quietly arranged for social work support. She had coordinated with hospital chaplains to provide appropriate religious support for families from diverse faith backgrounds. This woman has created a model for civilian support that could be replicated throughout the military medical system, Major Foster wrote in her summary report. Her effectiveness stems from her personal experience with military sacrifice, her cultural competency, and her intuitive understanding of family dynamics during medical crises. She represents exactly the kind of citizen engagement that our military families need and deserve. General Reeves studied the report with growing interest. She had been looking for ways to highlight positive civilian contributions to military readiness, especially in an era when civilian-military relations sometimes seemed strained. Maria Santos represented an ideal example of how personal experience with military service could motivate civilians to provide extraordinary support for service members and their families. The general's interest in Maria's story coincided with preparations for her upcoming visit to Walter Reed as part of a broader assessment of military medical facilities. Her staff had originally planned a standard tour focused on medical capabilities and administrative efficiency, but General Reeves decided to expand the agenda to include meetings with civilian support staff who were making significant contributions to patient care. "I want to meet this Maria Santos," General Reeves told Major Foster, "and I want to understand how we can better recognize and support civilians who are providing this kind of service to our military families." The request set off a flurry of activity at Walter Reed, where hospital administrators suddenly found themselves preparing for a four-star general's visit with almost no advance notice. Dr. Williams, who had been tasked with coordinating the general's meetings with civilian staff, faced the unprecedented challenge of determining how to present Maria to someone of General Reeves' stature. "She's a cleaning lady who doesn't speak perfect English," Dr. Williams confided to Dr. Chen. "How do we explain to a four-star general that our most effective family support comes from someone who's not even trained in patient care?" Dr. Chen, who had been advocating for Maria's recognition for months, saw this as the opportunity she had been waiting for. "We explain it exactly as it is," she replied. "Sometimes the most effective support comes from authenticity and personal experience rather than formal training. General Reeves will understand that better than anyone." Meanwhile, Maria remained unaware that her name had reached the highest levels of military leadership. She continued her daily rounds, nodding with some concern that there seemed to be increased administrative activity throughout the hospital. Security was tighter. Maintenance crews were working overtime to ensure everything was spotless, and there were whispered conversations about an important visit from Washington. Mrs. Henderson finally approached Maria 3 days before General Reeves' scheduled arrival, struggling with how to explain the situation to someone who had never sought attention or recognition for her work. "Maria," Mrs. Henderson began carefully, "there's going to be a visit from a very important military officer next week. A general from the Pentagon wants to meet with some of our civilian staff who work with military families." Maria looked confused. "Pourquoi? I mean, why? I just clean rooms." "That's just it," Mrs. Henderson replied. "You don't just clean rooms. Apparently, you've been helping families in ways that have gotten attention from some very important people. This general wants to thank you personally for your service to military families." The conversation left Maria deeply unsettled. She had never sought recognition for her work, and the idea of meeting with a high-ranking military officer made her anxious. Her English skills, while adequate for daily tasks and basic conversations with families, seemed inadequate for formal meetings with Pentagon officials. More troubling was the possibility that her informal role with families might be viewed as overstepping boundaries rather than providing needed support. That evening, Maria called her daughter Alina, a social worker who lived in nearby Alexandria. Alina had always admired her mother's dedication to military families, understanding that Maria's work at Walter Reed was as much about honoring Miguel's memory as it was about earning a paycheck. "Mommy, this is incredible," Alina said after hearing about the planned visit. "A four-star general doesn't travel from Washington to thank a hospital cleaning lady unless she's doing something truly extraordinary. You should be proud." But Maria felt only worry. "I don't know how to talk to generals," she confided. "What if I say something wrong? What if they decide I shouldn't be helping families anymore?" Alina recognized her mother's anxiety and offered to accompany her to the meeting for moral support. As someone fluent in both languages and familiar with institutional dynamics, she could help ensure that Maria's contributions were properly communicated to General Reeves. Word of the general's visit and planned meeting with Maria spread quickly through the network of military families at Walter Reed. Grace Kim, whose son David was now well enough to return to limited duty, made sure that other families understood the significance of this recognition. She organized an informal campaign to ensure that General Reeves heard directly from families about Maria's impact on their experience at the hospital. "Maria Santos embodies everything we hope for in civilian support for military families," Grace told other mothers gathered in the family waiting area. "This general needs to know that Maria isn't just doing her job. She's providing a service that makes the difference between despair and hope for families facing the worst moments of their lives." The families began preparing their own testimonials about Maria's contributions, wanting to ensure that General Reeves understood the full scope of her impact. They documented specific instances where Maria had provided emotional support during critical moments, helped navigate hospital bureaucracy, or simply offered the comfort of someone who understood military sacrifice from personal experience. Staff Sergeant Kim, now recovered enough to participate in the conversation, offered his own perspective on Maria's role in his healing process. "She was there when I couldn't speak, when I couldn't move, when I wasn't sure I wanted to keep fighting," he told the group. "Her presence reminded me that my service mattered, that people cared enough to honor the sacrifice even when it cost them personally." Dr. Chen compiled all of this feedback into a comprehensive brief for General Reeves, hoping to ensure that the general understood Maria's impact from multiple perspectives. The brief included patient outcome data, family satisfaction scores, staff observations, and personal testimonials that painted a picture of someone who had created an entirely new model for civilian support of military families. Major Foster, who was coordinating General Reeves' visit schedule, reviewed Dr. Chen's brief and recognized that this meeting would likely become the centerpiece of the general's Walter Reed visit. The story of Maria Santos represented everything that General Reeves wanted to highlight about civilian contributions to military readiness, personal sacrifice, cultural competency, intuitive understanding of family needs, and dedication that went far beyond job requirements. "This is exactly the kind of story that reminds people why civilian support matters," Major Foster told her staff. "This woman has channeled her personal loss into service that honors her son's sacrifice while helping other military families. It's a perfect example of how individual dedication can create institutional impact." General Reeves herself was becoming increasingly interested in the details of Maria's story as her staff provided additional background information. The general had lost friends in Iraq and Afghanistan and understood the unique perspective that Gold Star families brought to military support. She recognized that Maria's effectiveness came not from professional training, but from authentic understanding of military sacrifice and its impact on families. The general decided to structure her meeting with Maria as an informal conversation rather than a formal recognition ceremony, believing that Maria would be more comfortable in a relaxed setting where she could speak naturally about her work and motivations. She instructed her staff to arrange the meeting in a family conference room rather than an administrative office, hoping to create an environment where Maria felt valued rather than intimidated. As the day of the visit approached, Maria's anxiety continued to grow despite reassurances from her daughter, her supervisor, and the military families who had advocated for her recognition. She had spent 23 years working in the margins of the institution, providing support that was valued by families, but invisible to administrators. The prospect of suddenly being thrust into the spotlight felt overwhelming. The night before General Reeves' visit, Maria spent extra time at Miguel's memorial corner in her apartment, looking through photographs and letters from his deployment. She found herself talking to his picture, explaining the unexpected turn her life was taking, and asking for strength to represent military families well in her meeting with the general. "Mijo," she whispered to his photograph, "I never wanted attention for helping soldiers. I just wanted to honor your memory by taking care of your brothers and sisters. Now this important general wants to meet me, and I'm scared I'll disappoint everyone who has supported me." But as she looked at Miguel's proud smile and his dress uniform, Maria felt her anxiety begin to transform into determination. She realized that this meeting wasn't really about her at all. It was about ensuring that civilian support for military families was recognized and valued. If her story could help other civilians understand how to better serve military personnel, then meeting with General Reeves was simply another way to continue Miguel's mission of helping soldiers. The morning of the visit dawned clear and cold, with the early spring sun casting long shadows across the Walter Reed campus. Maria arrived for her shift as usual, but Mrs. Henderson had arranged for another staff member to cover her regular duties so that she could prepare for the afternoon meeting. Elena arrived at midday to provide moral support and help with translation if needed. As General Reeves' convoy approached Walter Reed, Maria Santos prepared to step out of the shadows that had hidden her extraordinary service for more than 2 decades. Neither she nor the general could have anticipated how profoundly this meeting would impact both of their perspectives on what it truly meant to serve those who serve. General Patricia Reeves arrived at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center with the bearing and precision that characterized every aspect of her distinguished career. At 58 years old, she had served in 3 combat deployments, commanded at every level from company to corps, and earned a reputation as an officer who never forgot that leadership meant serving the people under her command. Her 4 stars represented not just rank, but a commitment to excellence that had defined 35 years of military service. The general's morning tour of Walter Reed's medical facilities had been impressive but routine, state-of-the-art equipment, dedicated medical staff, and efficient procedures that reflected the military's investment in caring for wounded warriors. But General Reeves had not traveled from the Pentagon to see technology and administrative processes. She was here to understand the human dimension of military medicine, particularly the civilian contributions that often determined whether soldiers and families emerged from medical crises stronger or broken. Major Foster accompanied the general throughout the day, providing briefings on various aspects of hospital operations while steering the conversation toward the afternoon meeting that both women anticipated would be the most significant moment of the visit. As they walked through the ICU where Maria spent most of her time, Major Foster pointed out the family waiting areas, patient rooms, and support facilities that formed the landscape of Maria's daily service. "This is where she works," Major Foster explained as they passed the nurse's station where Maria's cart was parked while she prepared for their meeting. "Every day for 23 years, she's moved through these halls, cleaning rooms but also watching for ways to support families who are facing their worst fears." General Reeves paused to examine the environment more closely, noting the details that revealed how the space functioned for families in crisis. She observed the worn furniture in waiting areas where parents kept vigil beside dying children, the scattered magazines in languages other than English, the bulletin board covered with thank you notes and photographs from former patients who had recovered enough to return home. "Tell me about the families she's helped," General Reeves requested. "I want to understand what she's been able to accomplish that our formal support systems haven't provided." Major Foster pulled out her tablet and began sharing specific case studies that illustrated Maria's unique approach to family support. She described how Maria had helped the Johnsons, a military couple from rural Georgia, navigate the complexity of their son's traumatic brain injury by providing simple explanations in language they could understand. She explained how Maria had connected the Rodriguez family with appropriate chaplain services by recognizing their need for spiritual support during their daughter's amputation recovery. She detailed how Maria had prevented the Williams family from making a premature decision about end-of-life care by gently encouraging them to seek additional medical opinions. In each case, Major Foster explained, She provided something that our professional staff couldn't offer: authentic understanding based on personal experience with military loss. Families trusted her because they recognized that she had walked the path they were traveling. Dr. Chen joined them for the final part of the tour, adding clinical context to the stories that Major Foster had been sharing. She provided data showing improved patient outcomes in areas where Maria worked, reduced family stress levels as measured by social work assessments, and higher satisfaction scores among military families who had interacted with her. From a medical standpoint, Dr. Chen explained, she's been providing therapeutic intervention without any formal training, but her effectiveness comes from something that can't be taught: genuine empathy based on shared experience with military sacrifice. As the time approached for their meeting with Maria, General Reeves found herself looking forward to the conversation with unusual anticipation. She had met countless civilians who supported military families through various programs and organizations, but the reports about Maria Santos suggested someone who had created her own unique form of service that transcended traditional categories of support. Maria waited in the family conference room with Alina by her side, wearing her best dress and fighting nervousness that made her hands shake slightly. She had spent the morning reviewing English phrases that Alina had helped her practice, wanting to ensure that she could express her thoughts clearly to such an important visitor. The room had been chosen specifically to make her feel comfortable, but the prospect of meeting a four-star general still seemed overwhelming. Alina, who understood her mother's anxiety, had prepared talking points that would help Maria explain her work in terms that military leadership would appreciate. She knew that her mother's humility might prevent her from adequately describing the significance of her contributions, so Alina was ready to provide translation not just of language, but of concepts that Maria might struggle to articulate in English. When General Reeves entered the conference room, accompanied by Major Foster and Dr. Chen, Maria immediately stood and attempted to salute despite Alina's earlier explanation that civilians were not expected to salute military officers. The gesture, awkward but sincere, revealed the deep respect that Maria felt for military service and her uncertainty about proper protocols for such meetings. "Please sit down," General Reeves said gently, recognizing Maria's nervousness and wanting to establish a comfortable atmosphere for their conversation. "I'm here because I've heard extraordinary things about your work with military families, and I wanted to thank you personally." Maria looked at Alina for support before responding. "General, I don't know why you want to see me. I just clean rooms and try to help families when they are sad." General Reeves smiled, immediately understanding that Maria's humility was genuine and that she truly didn't comprehend the significance of her contributions. "Mrs. Santos, sometimes the most important work appears simple on the surface, but has profound impact on people's lives. From what I've learned, you've been providing support to military families that has made a real difference in their ability to cope with medical crises." Alina translated the general's words into Spanish, helping Maria understand the full meaning, then translated Maria's response back into English. "She says that she helps families because she understands their pain. When she lost her son Miguel in Afghanistan, other people helped her survive that loss, and now she wants to help other mothers and fathers who are facing the same fears." General Reeves leaned forward, her formal military bearing softening as she recognized the authenticity of Maria's motivation. "Tell me about Miguel. What kind of soldier was he?" Maria's face brightened immediately, and her nervousness diminished as she began sharing stories about her son. With Alina's help translating the more complex passages, she described Miguel's decision to become a medic because he wanted to save lives rather than take them. She explained how proud he had been to serve alongside soldiers from all backgrounds, how he had written letters home describing the friendships he had formed with his fellow soldiers. She showed General Reeves the photograph she always carried, pointing out the medic insignia on Miguel's uniform. "He died helping other soldiers," Maria continued, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "His commander wrote that Miguel ran into danger to save wounded soldiers, that he died trying to help his friends. When I work here, when I help families of soldiers, I feel like Miguel's spirit is still helping soldiers." General Reeves studied the photograph of Miguel Santos, seeing in his young face the same qualities she had observed in thousands of soldiers throughout her career: idealism, courage, and commitment to something larger than himself. She understood immediately why Maria's grief had transformed into service rather than bitterness. Your son would be very proud of what you've accomplished, General Reeves said simply. You found a way to honor his sacrifice by continuing his mission of helping soldiers, just in a different way. Dr. Chen provided additional context about Maria's impact, sharing specific examples of how her interventions had improved patient care and family outcomes. She described Maria's intuitive ability to identify when families needed support, her skill in providing cultural bridge building for Spanish-speaking families, and her unique credibility with parents who were facing the possibility of losing children to combat injuries. Major Foster added details about the broader implications of Maria's work, explaining how her model of civilian support could potentially be replicated at other military medical facilities. She described the gap in formal support services that Maria had filled through personal initiative, and how her approach demonstrated the value of engaging civilians who had personal experience with military sacrifice. As the conversation continued, General Reeves found herself increasingly impressed not just by Maria's accomplishments, but by her character. Here was someone who had channeled personal tragedy into service that honored both her son's memory and the ongoing needs of military families. Maria had created her own form of Gold Star family advocacy without any official support or recognition, driven purely by her understanding of what military families needed during their darkest moments. Mrs. Santos, General Reeves said after listening to detailed accounts of Maria's work, what you've been doing represents the very best of civilian support for our military families. You've provided a service that our formal programs sometimes can't offer authentic understanding based on shared experience with military loss. Maria looked puzzled, still not fully grasping why her daily work had attracted such high-level attention. Elena helped translate the general's words, adding her own explanation of why Maria's contributions were considered so significant. The general is saying that what you do for families here is special, Elena explained in Spanish. You help in ways that trained professionals can't because you understand their pain from your own experience. That makes your help more valuable than official programs. General Reeves then asked Maria a question that revealed the true purpose of this meeting. What would you need to be able to help even more families? If you could expand your work or do it better, what would help you accomplish that? The question caught Maria off guard. She had never considered that her informal role might be formalized or expanded. After consulting with Elena, she responded hesitantly, I think, maybe if other people who lost soldiers could help families too, and maybe if families knew that someone understands their fears because she has those fears too. General Reeves nodded thoughtfully, recognizing that Maria had intuitively identified key elements of effective peer support programs. The idea of engaging Gold Star families more systematically in supporting other military families facing medical crises had significant potential for improving outcomes across the military medical system. What if, General Reeves proposed, we found ways to formally recognize the kind of work you've been doing? What if other hospitals could learn from your approach to supporting military families? Maria's response revealed both her humility and her wisdom. If it helps soldiers and families, then is good. But most important is that families know someone cares about them when they are scared and alone. The title or recognition doesn't matter if the caring is real. General Reeves smiled, recognizing that she was speaking with someone who understood service in its purest form, not as a path to recognition or advancement, but as a moral obligation to help others based on shared experience and genuine empathy. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with General Reeves asking detailed questions about Maria's methods, her observations about what military families needed most, and her suggestions for how civilian support could be better integrated into military medical care. Throughout the discussion, Maria's responses revealed an intuitive understanding of family psychology, cultural competency, and crisis intervention that impressed everyone in the room. As the meeting concluded, General Reeves stood and extended her hand to Maria. Mrs. Santos, it has been an honor to meet you. Your service to our military families represents the very best of American values, and I want to ensure that your contributions receive the recognition they deserve. Maria accepted the handshake, still uncertain about what this recognition might entail, but grateful that her work was being acknowledged by someone who clearly understood military service. As General Reeves prepared to leave, she turned back for one final comment that would prove to be prophetic. Mrs. Santos, I suspect that this conversation is just the beginning. Your story needs to be shared more widely, and your approach to supporting military families needs to be studied and potentially replicated. You've created something valuable, and we owe it to other military families to learn from what you've accomplished. Neither Maria nor General Reeves could have anticipated how prescient those words would prove to be, or how dramatically Maria's life was about to change. As a result of this seemingly simple meeting between a four-star general and a cleaning lady, who had spent more than 2 decades quietly serving military families in her own unique way. The transformation began 3 weeks after General Reeves' visit, when Maria Santos received a phone call that would forever alter her understanding of her own worth and impact. Major Foster was calling from the Pentagon to inform her that she had been selected to receive the Secretary of Defense Medal for exceptional civilian service, one of the highest honors that could be bestowed upon a non-military employee supporting the Department of Defense. Mrs. Santos, Major Foster explained through Alina, who was translating the conversation, General Reeves was so impressed by your work that she personally recommended you for this recognition. The medal is awarded to civilians who demonstrate extraordinary dedication to supporting military personnel and their families. Maria sat in stunned silence as Alina translated the significance of this honor. The medal had been awarded to fewer than 50 civilians in the past decade, typically going to senior executives, prominent advocates, or individuals who had made significant financial contributions to military causes. Never before had it been awarded to someone in Maria's position, a hospital cleaning lady whose contributions had been recognized primarily by the families she had served. The ceremony would take place at Walter Reed in 6 weeks, with General Reeves personally presenting the medal in front of an audience that would include hospital leadership, military families who had nominated Maria for the recognition, and representatives from veteran advocacy organizations. For someone who had spent 23 years working invisibly in the margins of the institution, the prospect of such public attention was both overwhelming and humbling. Alina helped her mother understand that this recognition carried implications far beyond the ceremony itself. The Department of Defense was developing a new program called the Gold Star Family Support Initiative, designed to systematically engage families who had lost service members in providing peer support to other military families facing medical crises. Maria's work at Walter Reed had become the model for this program, and she was being asked to help train other Gold Star family members to provide similar support at military medical facilities across the country. "Mommy," Alina explained, "they want you to teach other mothers and fathers who have lost children in war how to help families the way you've been helping them here. Your work is going to help military families everywhere." The magnitude of this opportunity gradually dawned on Maria as she processed what Alina was telling her. Her quiet service to individual families was about to become a template for systematic support that could reach thousands of military families dealing with medical emergencies. Miguel's sacrifice, channeled through her work at Walter Reed, would now honor fallen service members across the entire military medical system. Dr. Chen, who had been instrumental in documenting Maria's impact, was asked to develop the clinical framework for the Gold Star Family Support Initiative. She worked closely with Maria over the following weeks to understand the specific techniques and approaches that made her interventions so effective. Together, they identified key principles that could be taught to other Gold Star families. Active listening, without offering false hope, cultural sensitivity that respected diverse family backgrounds, practical assistance with navigating hospital bureaucracy, and the authentic credibility that came from personal experience with military loss. The program would begin with a pilot project at 5 military medical facilities, each partnering with local Gold Star families to provide peer support services. Maria would serve as the senior advisor for the program, traveling to these facilities to train volunteers and help establish protocols that balanced informal family support with professional medical care. Mrs. Henderson, Maria's supervisor who had once worried about her inappropriate relationships with families, found herself coordinating with senior hospital administrators to restructure Maria's position. She would retain her connection to day-to-day hospital operations, but would also have formal responsibilities for family support services, with a title that reflected her unique role as both institutional employee and Gold Star family advocate. 23 years I've supervised Maria, Mrs. Henderson confided to Dr. Williams, and I never understood what she was really accomplishing. I thought she was just a very dedicated cleaning lady. Now I realize she was creating an entirely new form of patient care that we didn't have the wisdom to recognize. The weeks leading up to the medal ceremony brought a steady stream of visitors to Walter Reed, each wanting to understand how Maria's approach could be replicated at their facilities or within their organizations. Representatives from the Veterans Administration, military family support organizations, and civilian hospitals that served veteran populations came to observe Maria's interactions with families and interview the people who had benefited from her care. Grace Kim, whose advocacy had initiated the chain of events leading to Maria's recognition, served as an unofficial coordinator for these visits. She arranged for Maria to meet with delegations from various organizations, always ensuring that Alina was available to help with translation, and that the meetings were scheduled around Maria's continued work with current patients and families. "What you're seeing," Grace would tell these visitors, "is what happens when someone channels personal loss into service rather than bitterness. Maria lost her son, but instead of withdrawing from the military community, she found a way to honor his sacrifice by helping other military families. That authenticity is what makes her so effective." Staff Sergeant Kim, now fully recovered and preparing to return to active duty, became one of Maria's most articulate advocates. He spoke to visiting delegations about the importance of her presence during his recovery, explaining how her combination of practical help and emotional support had accelerated his healing in ways that purely medical intervention could not have achieved. "She was there when I couldn't remember my own name," he would tell visitors. "She talked to me in Spanish even though I don't speak Spanish, and somehow her voice reminded me that I was a person worth fighting for, not just a collection of injuries to be treated. That's what saved my life, knowing that someone cared about me as a human being." The medal ceremony itself exceeded everyone's expectations for significance and emotional impact. General Reeves had arranged for the event to take place in Walter Reed's main auditorium, with an audience of nearly 300 people including current patients and their families, hospital staff, military leaders, and representatives from Gold Star family organizations across the country. Maria wore a simple black dress that Alina had helped her choose, with Miguel's military portrait pinned to her chest alongside the hospital identification badge she had worn for 23 years. As she walked onto the stage with Alina beside her for support, the audience rose in spontaneous applause that continued for nearly 5 minutes. General Reeves' remarks placed Maria's service in the broader context of civilian contributions to military readiness. "Mrs. Maria Santos represents the very best of American values," the general declared. "She has transformed personal grief into public service, individual loss into collective healing, private pain into shared strength. Through her daily work with military families, she has demonstrated that true patriotism is measured not by what we say, but by what we do for those who sacrifice on our behalf." The medal itself, a bronze star suspended from a ribbon in the colors of all 5 military services, seemed almost secondary to the recognition that Maria's work represented. As General Reeves pinned the medal to her dress, Maria thought about Miguel and wondered whether he could see this moment, whether he understood that his death had somehow led to a form of service that honored not just his sacrifice, but the sacrifices of all the soldiers and families she had supported over the years. Alina translated the general's words as she invited Maria to address the audience. Speaking in Spanish with Alina translating, Maria's remarks were brief but profound. "I never wanted to be special or famous. I just wanted my son Miguel's death to have meaning beyond my sadness. When I help families here, I feel like Miguel is still helping soldiers." This medal belongs to all the Gold Star families who choose service instead of bitterness, who find ways to honor their children by helping other people's children. The ceremony concluded with a presentation of letters and photographs from more than 100 military families who had been touched by Maria's care over the years. Each letter told a story of specific ways that Maria had provided comfort, guidance, or practical assistance during moments of crisis. Collectively, they painted a picture of someone who had quietly revolutionized the concept of civilian support for military families. Following the ceremony, Maria's new responsibilities began immediately. She traveled to Fort Sam Houston in Texas for the first training session with Gold Star families who would implement the support program at military medical facilities in their regions. Working with Dr. Chen and Major Foster, She helped develop a curriculum that balanced structured training with the authentic relationships that made peer support effective. The program's early results exceeded all expectations. Military families receiving support from trained Gold Star volunteers showed measurably better outcomes in terms of stress management, decision-making clarity, and overall satisfaction with their medical experience. Hospital staff reported improved family cooperation and reduced conflicts between families and medical personnel. Maria's story began appearing in military publications, veteran advocacy newsletters, and mainstream media outlets that recognized the broader significance of her recognition. She was invited to speak at conferences on military family support, veteran care, and Gold Star family advocacy. Each appearance reinforced the central message that emerged from her experience. Authentic service based on shared sacrifice created connections that no amount of professional training could replicate. Gold Star Family Support Initiative expanded rapidly, with requests for implementation coming from military medical facilities around the world. Maria found herself traveling internationally to help establish programs at facilities serving American military personnel in Germany, Japan, and South Korea. In each location, she worked with local Gold Star families to adapt her approach to different cultural contexts while maintaining the core principles that made peer support effective. 2 years after receiving the medal, Maria Santos had been transformed from an invisible hospital employee into a nationally recognized advocate for military family support. She retained her position at Walter Reed, but now divided her time between direct patient family services and program development responsibilities that took her across the country and around the world. The program she had inspired now served thousands of military families annually, with more than 300 trained Gold Star family volunteers providing peer support at 47 military medical facilities. Each volunteer carried forward the principles that Maria had developed through years of quiet service: respect for family autonomy, cultural sensitivity, practical assistance, and the authentic credibility that came from personal experience with military sacrifice. Elena often accompanied her mother on these travels, serving as translator and cultural bridge, but also as witness to the remarkable transformation that had occurred in their lives. "You were always special, Mommy," she would tell Maria during their flights between training sites. "The difference is that now other people can see what I've always known about your heart." Maria's response never varied. "Miguel is the special one. I just found a way to let his spirit keep helping soldiers. That's all any Gold Star parent can do, find a way to make sure our children's sacrifices continue to help other people's children." The impact of Maria's recognition extended beyond the formal program she had inspired. Her story became a touchstone for discussions about civilian contributions to military readiness, the importance of recognizing non-traditional forms of service, and the potential for transforming personal loss into public benefit. Military leaders pointed to her example when explaining why civilian support was essential to military effectiveness. As Maria Santos approached her 25th anniversary at Walter Reed, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had taken her from invisible cleaning lady to nationally recognized advocate. The transformation had been profound, but the core motivation remained unchanged: honoring Miguel's sacrifice by serving the military families who continued to face the challenges and losses that she understood so deeply. The four-star general who had recognized her service had been correct in predicting that their meeting was just the beginning. Maria Santos had gone from unnoticed to honored, from invisible to indispensable, from grieving mother to national advocate. But perhaps most importantly, she had proven that the most powerful form of service often emerges from the quiet dedication of ordinary people who find extraordinary ways to help others navigate life's most difficult challenges. In the end, Maria Santos' story became proof that recognition, when it finally comes, can transform not just individual lives, but entire systems of care and support. Her decades of quiet service had prepared her for a form of leadership she never sought, but was uniquely qualified to provide, demonstrating that sometimes the most important work happens in the shadows, until someone with sufficient authority steps forward to bring it into the light.